Welcome to Blood, Bourbon, a vampire-fated mate romance, where fate is complicated, the connection is undeniable, and some bonds are written in blood long before we ever meet. There's snark, steam, and a mate bond neither of them asked for, but can't escape. Buckle up, Coven. From haunted hearts to ancient curses, you'll find stories here that pull you in and don't let go. If you're into tales that twist the real and the unreal, you're in the right place. TM Nyxen Audiobooks. Hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. The crosscut pulsed like the dark heart of the city, nestled beneath the cobblestone streets, where the law's reach weakened, and shadows did the dirty work. A haze of cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air, clinging to the low-hung chandeliers, each crystal refracting the dim light and casting dancing shadows. The smoky atmosphere choked the lungs, a familiar comfort to the clientele that reveled in the forbidden, mingling with the smoke. The raw, brassy cry of a jazz trumpet soared, a seductive siren song promising oblivion. The clink of whiskey glasses, the hushed whispers of secrets, and the rhythmic thumping of bass drums formed a symphony of sin. Laughter, sharp as the shards of a broken bottle, tangled with the frantic shuffle of cards and the rustle of silken dresses. Money changed hands with fever desperation, some of it honest, most of it steeped in deals that would never see the light of day. And the bourbon here, it's not bathtub swill, came straight off a hijacked shipment from Kentucky. You don't sip this, you savor it. You don't spill it, you die over it. Adrian Steelgrave stood above it all, a statue carved from ice and granite, leaning over the iron balcony that overlooked the teeming floor. Immaculate in a tailored black suit, his tie knotted with surgical precision. Instead of the usual showy jewelry his family favored, Adrian wore only a single gold and onyx family-crested ring on his right hand. He was the picture of poise. But beneath the sleek veneer, a barely perceptible tremor, a muscle twitching in his jaw, betrayed the tempest brewing within. He tapped one polished black shoe against the iron railing, a rhythmic pulse that echoed the club's heartbeat. The crosscut was his father's kingdom, now his. A speakeasy, sure, but more than that, the beating artery of Steelgrave operations, gambling, debt collection, blood, always blood in one form or another. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and desperation, seemed to press down on him. Below, Victor Steelgrave, Adrian's uncle and a proud relic of a crueler time, hauled a man to his knees. The debtor, a gaunt figure with sweat plastering his thinning hair to his skull, sputtered apologies, his words slurred by too much gin and not enough fear. Please, Victor, I can get it, I swear. Victor didn't care for either. He tightened his grip on the man's collar, his knuckles white. A nearby gambler, his face flushed, leaned towards his companion, muttering, "Bad luck following poor Vincent tonight." Another, older, with a walrus mustache and a glint of predatory excitement in his eyes, chuckled, "Serves the fool right. Should have paid up when he had the chance." "You knew the stakes," Victor growled, his voice a jagged knife, drawing a chorus of nervous murmurs from those close enough to hear. "We don't like repeating ourselves." He glanced up, seeking Adrian's approval and recognition in his dark eyes. Adrian's jaw tightened further. The knot of his tie seemed to constrict, the fabric suddenly too tight. He sipped his bourbon, the crystal glass cold against his lips, though it did nothing for him. The warmth couldn't reach him. It never did. His gaze was fixed on the scene below, his expression unreadable, a carefully constructed wall. A waiter, sensing his displeasure, quickly refilled his glass, the clinking of the bottle barely audible in the din. "That's enough," Adrian called down, his voice a cool command wrapped in silk. The entire club seemed to tilt an ear toward him, the music momentarily softening, the chatter fading. The sudden hush, the collective intake of breath, was the true measure of his power. Victor's lip curled, a sneer that spoke volumes of contempt for the younger man's softness. "Boy, the family doesn't run on charity." Adrian's head tilted, the edge in his voice slicing through the silence like a razor. "Boy? Watch who you're talking to, Victor." Victor's gaze faltered, just a fractiona crack in his bravado that didn't go unnoticed. "And we don't run on spectacle either." I said, "That's enough." Adrian did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The steel in his tone could cut through stone. He slowly, deliberately set his glass down, the sound echoing like a warning shot in the stillness. The debtor's life was spared, for now. But Adrian knew the man wouldn't make it out of the Steelgrave web. Debtors never did. They disappeared. Quietly, conveniently. He had seen it happen too many times before. His family didn't kill people in alleys anymore. That was peasant work, the crude methods of a dying era. No, the missing men were transformed, bled dry until the last gasp, or worse, turned into something obedient, something that no longer resembled the men they once were. Not quite dead, but certainly not alive. The whispers about it were even more terrifying than the act itself. Adrian turned away from the railing, his disgust carefully folded behind a mask of indifference. His footfalls echoed softly as he crossed the balcony, the muted sound swallowed by the rising noise of the club. He entered the velvet curtained alcove reserved for Lady Sable Duval, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. She was already there, draped in garnet silk that seemed to shimmer and breathe with her every movement, the light catching the sharp planes of her face. Her dark eyes flicked to him, unreadable, as always. The curtain swished closed behind him, shutting out the noise and the judging eyes of the club. "Your uncle seems lively tonight." Her Romanian accent clipped the words, adding just enough edge to make them sting. The air around them crackled with an unspoken tension, a dangerous game of cat and mouse they both seemed to relish. "He's a relic," Adrian replied, pouring himself another bourbon out of habit, not desire. He swirled the amber liquid, the movement precise, economical. The old guard has teeth, but no patience. Patience is overrated. Teeth, however, her lips hinted at a smirk, a fleeting moment of amusement that died quickly. There was something delicious in their shared coldness. Neither gave easily, neither wanted to. Her hand, draped in a black glove, rested on the edge of the small table between them. Another debtor vanished this morning. He handed her a small black book, its leather-worn, smooth names scrawled inside, the club's ledgers. "Third this month." He kept his eyes on her, gauging her reaction. "And the constable?" she asked, flipping through the pages with clinical disinterest. Her fingers, long and elegant, barely moved as she flicked through the pages. Hartwell sniffing at the doors. "He thinks it's just organized crime." Adrian's mouth twitched in something that might have been amusement, if he were the type. "He's one step behind, as always." The corner of her lips curled into a brief, sardonic smile. "And if he gets too close?" she inquired, her voice low, laced with a hint of warning. "Then I let him." The words were a quiet pronouncement, a chilling admission. Sable arched a brow, curious despite herself. "You'd let a man like Hartwell see the truth?" Adrian shrugged, swirling the bourbon in his glass, the ice clinking softly. Better he know what hunts this city than waste his time chasing shadows. She studied him, the weight of her gaze palpable, a silent assessment. "You're not like the others. Don't romanticize me, Sable." "I'm exactly like them." He set the glass down, untouched. "I'm just tired." The weight of it hung in the air, a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Good. Being tired makes us dangerous. We stop pretending the hunger can be managed." Her voice was a soft rasp, cutting through the heavy silence. Their eyes locked, not with heat, but with the cold gravity of two storms on a collision course. The air thickened with a shared sense of impending doom. Adrian broke the silence. "I'm hosting a gathering tomorrow. Some of the old families. Play nice." He ran a hand through his hair, sighing audibly. "I always do." She deadpanned, rising to leave. Her movements were graceful and deliberate, as if choreographed. "Sable." She paused, hand on the curtain, the crimson silk catching the light, casting a fiery glow on her face. "You're still under our protection here. I don't want you wandering alone." Not with the constable sniffing around and the old guard getting restless. His voice was devoid of warmth, but the words were a clear warning. She offered him a ghost of a smile, sharp and humorless. "I can handle myself, but I do so enjoy that you think otherwise." The curtain fell, and she was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of jasmine and the ghost of a promise. Adrian lingered, watching the smoky club churn below him. The crosscut thrived, but rot festered beneath the velvet and jazz. The missing men, the brutal enforcers, the human law creeping closer. He knew a reckoning was coming. He just didn't know yet whether he would survive it or if he even wanted to. The question he knew was not whether, but when. He finished off his untouched bourbon, the ice long melted, a small, chilling reminder of the coldness that surrounded him. The Casa de Noapte sat like a jeweled serpent on the edge of the French Quarter, coiled in velvet and vice. It wasn't the biggest brothel in the city, but it was the most untouchable. Everyone knew it belonged to Lady Sable Duval, and even the worst kind of man knew better than to cross her. Inside, the air was a heady mix. The cloying sweetness of expensive perfume mingled with the sharp tang of whiskey, a fragrant tapestry woven through the heavy velvet curtains and the hushed murmur of conversations. The scent of desire, like a languid predator, was everywhere. The girls, draped in silks that shimmered under the gaslight, moved like graceful phantoms. Their laughter, polished and practiced, never quite reached their eyes, reflecting the underlying tension and the unspoken transactions of the night. They were hers, not in ownership, but in protection. And Lady Sable protected what was hers with fangs bared, her Romanian pride a tangible force. "Marina," she snapped, her accent sharp as broken glass, the words slicing through the muted music spilling from a nearby salon. "I told you, no debt clients unsupervised. If they can't pay, they think they can take. Am I unclear?" Her voice echoed through the gilded hall, silencing the nearby chatter. "No, madam." "It won't happen again." Marina's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes downcast. "It better not." Sable's gaze softened only slightly, a flicker of something akin to understanding crossing her face. "You are not here to be prey. You are here to be queens in their little fantasies. If they forget that, I remind them." She held their gazes for a beat, ensuring each understood the price of failure. The women knew what Sable was capable of. She turned, her long coat swirling like a curtain in a gust, the movement drawing the eye. Her girls loved her, but they feared her more, and that was how it had to be. Sable Duval had lost too much to be anyone's victim. Exile had taught her that. Royal blood didn't mean protection. Royal blood made you a target, marked for ruin. She paused near the grand piano in the center hall, the notes of a mournful tune drifting through the air. The muted sounds of the orchestra, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the soft click of heels on the polished marble floor all punctuated the air. Pressing one pale hand to its smooth, cool surface, she closed her eyes, a fleeting memory of another life playing across her face. Sometimes she missed the old halls of Romania, the stone corridors, the icy mountains. Here, everything was soft, loud, sticky. The air in this city clung to her like a second skin. But she had carved out a new throne in this foreign city, a kingdom built on discretion and control. She wore it well. The heavy doors creaked open, and the scent hit her first bourbon, spice, and something darker, something maddeningly familiar. It was a scent that burrowed beneath her skin, a promise and a threat. "Adrian." Sable didn't bother looking up. The subtle shifting of the clientele and the hushed whispers signaled his arrival. "You just can't stay away, can you?" she asked, her voice a low, silky purr that belied the tension that suddenly filled the air. Adrian's voice, low and smooth, wrapped around her like the smoke he never inhaled. Some places are worth the trouble. The very air around him seemed charged, the electricity of their unspoken game crackling between them. She moved past him without pause, her steps crisp, her control absolute. "If you're here to check the books, the ledgers are in my office. If you're here to loiter, I charge for that." The words were polite, the tone, a practiced neutrality. He smirked, just slightly, his gray eyes glinting in the dim light. Why not both? It was a challenge, a subtle acknowledgement of the dance they were trapped in. Sable offered him a faint glance over her shoulder, a gesture that would have been flirtation on another woman. On her, it was a veiled dare. "You could send a man for the books. You don't need to see me for that." She knew what he wanted, what he truly desired, and refused to be manipulated. The game was simple: stay in control. "Ah, but then I'd miss the pleasure of your company." "And you do enjoy my company?" even if it comes dressed in inconvenience. He moved closer, his voice dropping, the seductive quality of it designed to provoke a reaction, to break through her carefully constructed facade. The game. Always the game. Neither of them was willing to tip their hand. Neither was willing to acknowledge the undeniable pull, the tether neither had chosen, but both felt tightening with every passing night. The air crackled with the unspoken, the barely contained desire that simmered beneath their icy politeness. He walked with her through the brothel's marbled halls, the gas lamps flickering as if they, too, were uneasy in his presence. Her girls cast him wary glances, but quickly dropped their eyes when Sable swept past, the silent communication, a language understood only by those who lived in the shadows. The subtle hum of the establishment continued, the music barely audible, the conversations a collection of hushed secrets. Things are getting complicated, Sable. He kept his voice low, measured, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the opulent surroundings, the expensive clientele, and the underlying unrest. The missing debtors, the constable poking around. The old guard is restless. Victor wants blood. Any blood will do. And you, Adrian? What do you want? She challenged, her voice echoing off the gilded walls. The tension between them was a tangible thing now, thick and heavy, pulling them closer together. He paused, fingers brushing the dark wood of a door frame, his dark hair falling over his forehead. I want this to run smoothly. I want to keep the peace. I want to stop cleaning up after the mess my family insists on making. His words were carefully chosen, a shield against her sharp gaze. She turned on her heel, facing him squarely now, the movement fluid and elegant. Liar. The single word held more weight than any accusation, spoken with the conviction of someone who knew the truth. His lips parted, but the protest never came. She was right. The truth was written on his face, no matter how well he hid it. You enjoy the power, she said, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. You enjoy the control. You don't like the price, but you pay it. You always pay it. And you? He challenged, his voice now a low growl, a warning. You build this kingdom of silk and velvet, but your hands are as red as mine. The accusation hung in the air, a brutal assessment of their shared world. Her dark eyes glinted, a spark of defiance in their depths. I have to be ruthless. No one is coming to save me. The words were a declaration of her independence, a testament to her strength. Maybe someone is. He was testing her, pushing her, trying to get past her defenses. Her laugh was cold, but it hummed beneath her ribs, a tremor of something she refused to acknowledge. Spare me the fantasy. They stood inches apart, the faded bond simmering beneath their skin like an itch they refused to scratch. Neither dared name it, because once named, it would own them, their destinies intertwined by something they could not comprehend. Adrian eventually exhaled, long and slow, the fight draining from him. I need you at the gathering tomorrow night. The old families, they'll expect you. Of course, I'm always expected, but never invited. Her voice dropped, velvety but dangerous, promising consequences. Funny how that works. You know why. Your exile, my exile, is mine to carry, not yours to wield. Though she longed for her home in Romania, she refused to be defined by that past. Adrian inclined his head, conceding, acknowledging the lines they had drawn between them. Still, it would be easier if we were allies. Her smile was a precise cut, a blade made of pure ice, but not nearly as interesting. He left without another word. The silence between them waited like a blade balanced on its edge. The unspoken words, the hidden desires, all simmering just beneath the surface. As the doors closed behind him, the subtle hush of the bordello seemed to deepen, the air thick with anticipation, the memory of his presence lingering. As the doors closed behind him, Sable let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple and muttered, Blestamata Lagatera, cursed bond. A whisper lost within the luxurious confines of the Casa de Noapte. The Fates had no sense of humor, and Sable Duval was once more alone. Chief Constable William Hartwell wasn't here to play games. He was here to tear the heart out of the city's criminal machine, piece by piece. Damn it, he thought. the familiar knot of frustration tightening in his gut. Why couldn't I just get a break? The problem was, the heart didn't bleed. The crosscut had been on his radar for months. Bootlegging, gambling, debts that vanished along with the debtors. Hartwell had his suspicions, plenty of them, but suspicions didn't close cases. Evidence did. And the Steelgraves were masters of leaving nothing behind but the scent of expensive cigars and a trail of unpaid dues. Tonight, he'd come ready. He kicked open the club's rear door, revolver drawn. "Police! No one moves!" The air exploded with sound and movement. The rhythmic clatter of boots on cobblestones, the harsh shout of orders, the rattle of chains as men were shoved against walls. Hartwell's men fanned out, overturning tables with a thud, smashing crates with a crack. The patrons? Calm. Too calm. They simply raised their hands, bemused, like they'd rehearsed this before. Find something. Anything. He barked at Sergeant Miller as he stormed toward the back rooms, muscles tight, jaw tighter. His boots echoed across the polished floor, but no one ran. No one even pretended to be afraid. It's always the same, he thought. Anger simmering just below the surface. Always a step behind. Adrian Steelgrave stood at the bar, pouring a drink with the composure of a man reading a newspaper. "Constable Hartwell, always a pleasure," Adrian drawled, not bothering to hide his amusement. "You're running liquor through the back alley, Steelgrave. I've got half the city whispering your name in their cups." Adrian handed the bourbon to a waiting patron with a faint smile. "Whispers aren't evidence." Hartwell bristled. "I'll find it." "You're welcome to look." Adrian gestured grandly to the club around them, where not a single illegal bottle remained. Not a single slip of ledger sat in the open. "By all means, tear the place apart again." His men returned empty-handed, frustrated, and muttering. "Nothing in here, Chief," Miller reported, his voice tight. Someone had tipped the club off. Again. Someone always did. Hartwell's knuckles whitened around the grip of his revolver, but he holstered it with a snap. Another dead end. Another step behind. "God damn it." Adrian leaned in just a fraction, voice cool. "Be careful chasing ghosts, Constable. Some of them bite." Hartwell didn't flinch. Eventually, even ghosts leave footprints. As he turned to leave, his gut twisted with something sour failure. This city, it's a goddamn hydra, he thought, rubbing his temples. Cut off one head and two more grow back. But then he heard it. A name spoken in a hush by one of the fleeing patrons. Casa de Noapte, a different house of vice. One with a reputation even the city's filth treaded carefully around. He'd heard of Lady Sable Duval whisper rumors, far in blood, cold as the grave. The stories intrigued him, but they were just stories. And William Hartwell didn't chase fairy tales. Still, he followed the thread. The Casa de Noapte glowed in the night like sin wrapped in silk. Its soft lights, its careful opulence, all of it suggested safety. But Hartwell knew better. Safe houses didn't have armed guards. Safe houses didn't carry the weight of so many missing names. He stepped inside, immediately out of place in his worn coat and hard-soled boots. The air was thick with exotic perfume and the murmur of hushed conversations. The girls watched him with thinly veiled curiosity, but their eyes flicked quickly to a figure at the top of the grand staircase. Sable Duval. She descended slowly, every step deliberate, the click of her heels echoing in the hush that followed his arrival. "Constable," she greeted, her tone polite but distant, as if he were a door-to-door salesman she didn't particularly care to entertain. "We don't usually receive the law. It unnerves the guests." Hartwell tipped his hat, his expression firm but neutral. "You'll find I'm not here for the guests." How disappointing. You'd be our first officer with such restraint. He should have looked away, should have ignored the sharp lines of her face, the precise way she moved, the careful distance she kept as though she could see straight through him, and found him mildly inconvenient. But he didn't look away. He was captivated. What is she? Something predatory? No, it's more, she's a spider. And I'm the fly, he thought, a flicker of unease running through him. Best to keep my distance then. Something about her unsettled him, though he couldn't pin it down. I'm following leads on a string of disappearances. Working men, small-time gamblers, last seen near your club, or here. Sable's lips twitched at the corner, not a smile, more like the memory of one. You suspect me of what, exactly? Murder? Kidnapping? Or am I simply too foreign for your comfort? Hartwell stiffened. I go where the trail leads. Perhaps your trail is poorly drawn. I run a clean house. My girls are protected. My books are open, unlike certain other establishments. Her words were dipped in something sweet, but the steel beneath was unmistakable. And the missing men? Men go missing every day in this city. Some because they owe, some because they forget they are not invincible. She stepped closer, just enough to let him taste the danger in her perfume. The scent pricked at his senses, a complex blend of spice and something else, something he couldn't quite place, but he felt a tightening in his chest. You'll find no monsters here, Constable, just women working to survive. But Hartwell's instincts gnawed at him. The way her staff moved around her, not like employees, but loyalists. The way the very walls of this place seemed to guard her secrets. He narrowed his eyes. I'll be watching. Closely. I wouldn't want it any other way. There it was. The faintest trace of satisfaction in her tone, as if she'd laid the bait and he'd taken it. Hook, line, and sinking soul. As Hartwell exited, the night pressing against his skin like wet wool, he couldn't shake her from his thoughts. There was something wrong about Sable Duval. Something he didn't understand. Something he was now dangerously drawn to uncover. The icy bite of the late-night air clawed at Lena Carter's exposed skin as she stumbled into the ornate entrance of the Casa de Noapte, just a few minutes past the stroke of midnight. Barefoot, her tattered dress clinging to her like a second unwelcome skin, she felt the cobblestone's roughness beneath her soles. Crimson already stained the edges of her dress and the pavement behind her, a brutal trail of her desperate flight. Her wild eyes darted from side to side, reflecting the flickering gas lamps of the street and mirroring the terror etched across her blood-streaked face. She gasped for air, each ragged breath a testament to the brutal ordeal she'd endured. Lena Carter, a name whispered amongst the shadows of the docks, a girl of little consequence, a card runner who dared to borrow from the wrong men, the ruthless Steelgraves, and paid the gruesome price in blood. She had been brutally marked. But fate, or perhaps a cruel twist of luck, had spared her the final, fatal blow. One of Sable's girls, a woman built like a statue with an air of serene command, saw her collapse onto the threshold and, recognizing the urgency of the situation, heaved the girl inside before the street rats could feast on her. The heavy oak door sealed shut with the click of a lock, shutting out the city's cold embrace and the potential for further violence. By the time Sable arrived, summoned by her staff, Lena was a crumpled heap on the parlor's plush velvet chaise, a discarded rag doll. She trembled violently, shaking like a leaf caught in a violent storm, her breaths shallow rasps in the opulent silence of the room. A smear of blood matted in her dark hair, and her porcelain skin was splattered with dirt and sweat. Her fingers clawed at the velvet, leaving behind faint, crimson trails. Sable knelt before her, her movements measured, deliberate. Her hands, elegant as always, were firm yet gentle as she assessed the girl's wounds, which were now, thankfully, staunched. The scent of blood mingled with the heavy perfume of the bordello, a strange clashing aroma. Who sent you here? Sable's voice was low, a silken rasp with a hint of steel. Her sharp and discerning eyes missed nothing. Lena's cracked lips barely moved, her jaw trembling. You're the only one who'd protect me. They said, there's a code. Her voice was barely more than a whisper, the words torn from her throat and rasping as they exited. The ancient code, a whispered secret, the silent law that bound the oldest, darkest corners of their world, the sanctuary of blood, a refuge for those marked, a protection born from necessity. Even in exile, even within the glittering cage of her bordello, Sable's house was bound to it. It couldn't be denied. She cursed under her breath in Romanian, the forgotten language a release for her frustration. Blestemata dateri, cursed duty, she whispered, the translation echoing in the room. Sanctuary wasn't offered out of kindness. It was a binding pact, older than the New World itself, and breaking it meant death, not just for the protected, but for the protector as well. Who chases you? The question was a formality. Sable already knew the answer, smelled it on the air, saw it in the desperate glint of fear in Lena's eyes. but she needed the girl to speak it aloud, to seal the pact with her own words. Steelgrave men. I ran. I didn't want to. I didn't want to hurt people. I didn't want to be this. The last words were a raw sob, a testament to the destruction of her soul. Sable's mouth pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. The girl had been twisted, turned against her will, most likely as punishment for her debts, yet another sick little trick Adrian's family used when the coin wasn't enough to purchase its power. She knew the Steelgraves, their capacity for cruelty, their willingness to bend the rules. She could not send the girl back. She couldn't let Adrian have her. To do so would be to betray the code, to spit in the face of the old laws. The code was iron, inflexible, and unyielding. Clean her up. Feed her. She stays, Sable ordered, her voice ringing with decisive authority, even as the heavy footfalls of approaching boots echoed from the entrance. The air in the room suddenly became taut, the scent of expensive perfume and blood clashing with the metallic tang of impending conflict. And there he was, Adrian. His coat was still dusted with the street's grit, the stains subtly mirroring the violence he caused in the city. His eyes burned with that cold, noble fury that was his trademark, a simmering rage barely contained behind a mask of aristocratic refinement. Sable. His voice was low, a growl that vibrated in the silence. But there was no charm tonight, no silken words, no veiled desire, just steel forged in the furnace of his anger. She's under my protection. Sable shot back, her arms crossing her chest in a gesture of defiance. You know the law. You know the code. Her voice barely wavered. She owes us. She ran. She's dangerous. He closed the distance between them, each step a deliberate act of aggression. The tension in the room thickened, pulling taut like piano wire stretched to its breaking point, threatening to snap. You can't keep her. I can. I will. Sable's chin tilted, daring him to cross the line. Or are you suggesting you're above the old laws now? Even you can't rewrite them. Her voice was a challenge, a dare. Adrian's jaw ticked, the muscles in his face working. You're harboring a threat. She's not stable. And you would what? Drag her back to your pit and break her until she is? The debt is blood now. The code binds us. Sable's words cut through the air like shards of glass. She killed one of my men, Sable. His voice cracked like a whip, sharp and controlled, laced with a dangerous edge. I am owed. Take it up with the elders. She snapped, her voice like frozen iron, the icy quality seeping into her bones. But you won't take her from this house. Not tonight. Not ever. The silence that fell between them was suffocating, heavy, and pregnant with unspoken words, with unbridled desires and the icy chill of the coming storm. His fists clenched, his teeth ground in frustration as his fury threatened to break free. The air practically sizzled with the unspoken truths neither of them could voice. Why? Her? He hissed, stepping closer, the echo of something far deeper, something beyond mere anger, rumbling beneath his carefully constructed facade. Why do you fight me on this? Sable's stare was unwavering, locked onto his. Because I must. Because we are bound to more than just our desires, Adrian. And God, how they desired. It was there in the almost imperceptible flicker of his gaze that dropped to her lips, in the way she tasted the air and the sharpness of her breath as she squared her shoulders, her chest rising with a force against its power. But the walls were too thick, the foundations too strong, the ice too solid. They would not yield. Not yet. Adrian's frustration simmered dangerously, threatening to erupt. But he forced himself to turn, his coat snapping behind him as he strode toward the door. Each step, a show of controlled rage. This isn't over, he warned, without looking back, his voice echoing with barely contained threat. It never is. As he vanished into the night, swallowed by the darkness outside, Sable exhaled, her pulse still thudding violently, an erratic rhythm beneath her cold skin. She should have been relieved. She wasn't. Lena's terrified eyes found her again from across the room. The girl clutched at the velvet, her knuckles white, her body still trembling. Sable muttered, Blestimata legatera, cursed bond, cursed duty, cursed man, and for the first time in a long while, she wondered if she'd chosen the right side. The memories of old Romania still lingered, a haunting melody that echoed through the corridors of Sable's mind. It was a time before America, before the Casa de Noapte, before she had to don the armor of ice to shield herself from the brutal world. Bucharest, 1894, was a city of crumbling castles, bitter winds, and royal intrigue, where the old vampire nobility ruled with elegance and terror. In the halls of Castelul Duval, the once majestic castle of the Duval line, the air was thick with the scent of gold, silk, and the soft perfume of fresh blood. The castle had been a sanctuary, a place of power, where the vampire nobility gathered to weave their intricate webs of politics and deception. But power, as Sable would soon learn, was a double-edged sword. It didn't invite peace, it bred knives, and with them, the whispers of betrayal. Sable, barely into her first century, was the youngest of the Duval line. She remembered the council chambers, the scent of burning parchment, and her father's voice trembling with suppressed rage as he spoke the words that would change her life forever. One of our own has made a pact with the mortals. The rumors of betrayal had begun to circulate, and Sable's family was at the center of the maelstrom. Her mother, pale as the moon, had told her to run, to flee the castle and the danger that lurked within its walls. But Sable was young, and the night the Duval house fell was etched in her memory like a scar. The Order of St. Elias, a human sect sworn to exterminate her kind, had come with fire, blessed silver, and righteous fury. But they weren't alone. Sable's cousins, kin turned against kin, had opened the gates, betraying their own family for the promise of human favor. The great halls of Castelul Duval burned as Sable fought her way through the carnage, a dagger in one hand, her mother's signet ring clutched in the other. She watched in horror as her brothers died, one by one, refusing to kneel to the hunters. She watched as her father made his final stand, throat bared in defiance, as the sun rose over the castle walls. The flames reflected in her black eyes as she fled the castle's collapse, fleeing into the cold, crumbling streets of Bucharest, hunted by her blood and the sanctimonious mortals. The voice of her uncle, a man she had once loved and respected, haunted her memory. Compassion is a lie, Sable. Love will betray you. Let the cold be your armor. The words had become a mantra, a reminder of the brutal world she lived in and the armor she needed to survive. Years later, Sable would leave her name behind, boarding a ship bound for America, where she would forge a new identity, one that would become synonymous with power and elegance. Lady Sable Duval was not born on Romanian soil. She was forged in its ruin, her heart tempered like steel in the fire of betrayal and loss. In the 1920s, New Orleans was a city of jazz and bourbon, of secrets and lies. Sable stood at the high windows of the Casa de Noapte, the Mississippi glittering below like a snake slithering through the darkness. The past pressed against her ribs like a blade, a constant reminder of the memories she had tried to keep hidden. She never told anyone the whole story, not her girls, not her allies, not even Adrian. But she wore the ice like armor now, not because she enjoyed it, but because survival demanded it. The Casa de Noapte was her kingdom, her final fortress, and every debt paid, every code honored, was another stone in its walls. She touched the worn ring on her finger, the only thing she'd kept from Romania, a tangible connection to the past she had tried to leave behind. Some nights, when the bourbon ran sweet and the jazz thumped loud enough to drown her thoughts, she let herself almost feel something. But then the cold would remind her, a bitter wind that swept through her soul, leaving her numb and unfeeling. Feelings were fractures, weaknesses that could get her burned. And Sable had learned to survive in a world where weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. The streets below whispered of trouble, of the blood debt she had incurred by protecting Lena, by standing against Adrian. The Steelgraves would not forget, and Sable knew that the ripple effects of her actions would be felt for a long time to come. As she let the curtains fall shut, her mouth set in a perfect, cruel line, Sable steeled herself for the challenges ahead. Let them come, she thought, a spark of defiance igniting within her. She had already survived the fall of an empire, and she could survive this. The ice that had become her armor would protect her, would keep her safe from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. And as she turned away from the window, Sable knew that she would face whatever came next, her heart frozen, her spirit unbroken. Chief Constable William Hartwell wasn't a man given to obsession. But something about Sable Duval clung to his mind like cigarette smoke impossible to shake, no matter how many raids he ordered or how many bottles he cracked open alone in his office. The stench of stale whiskey and desperation clung to the air, a constant companion to the endless rustle of paperwork. He'd been at this for months. The case file, a thick, dog-eared ledger, growing with each fruitless lead, each raid on the crosscut, a familiar sting of failure. He'd sit in his cramped office, the city's clamor a dull roar outside, and pore over the evidence. The air was thick with pipe tobacco and the ghosts of unanswered questions. The official file called her an entrepreneur. Hartwell ran a hand over the crisp, typed words, already growing faded from repeated readings. The carefully crafted facade, the veneer of respectability, grated on his nerves. The street called her untouchable. He'd gleaned that much from the whispers in the dimly lit alleys, the furtive glances of informants, the coded messages slipped into his hand, cryptic symbols etched onto fragile scraps of paper, passed from one contact to another in the shadows. The language of the underworld, a secret code he was slowly learning to decipher. The names, the places, the transactions, all pointing back to Duval. Hartwell called her dangerous, though he didn't know why yet. That lack of understanding gnawed at him. It was a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. He'd raided the crosscut more times than he could count, always a step too late. The metallic tang of spent shell casings lingered in the air, a constant reminder of his failure. Illegal liquor vanished. Account books suddenly balanced, and the financial records of their activities disappeared like smoke. The gambling floors always came up just clean enough to survive scrutiny. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his gut that it was all a carefully orchestrated performance. And yet, men disappeared. Debtors, rivals, informants, all swept under the rug of the Steelgrave empire. He'd seen the desperation in their eyes, the fear etched on their faces before they vanished. He'd interviewed their families, heard their pleas, the hollowness of their hope weighing him down. Hartwell didn't believe in ghosts, but he was starting to believe in something damn close. He pushed back from his desk, the chair groaning under his weight. He glanced at the map of the city pinned to the wall, circled locations connected to Duval and the Steelgraves, his face a mask of grim determination. The city's underbelly pulsed beneath the shiny skin of Prohibition. Hartwell stomped through it like a man possessed, dragging bookkeepers into smoky backrooms, the air thick with the scent of stale beer and fear, flipping betting houses upside down, the scent of cheap perfume and desperation, shaking down bartenders until they sang like canaries half-truths, rumors, whispers of a family too clean to be real. He'd bark commands at his officers, the harshness in his voice, a reflection of his growing frustration. Find me something. Anything. This goddamn city isn't a stage for their charade. He'd slammed his fist on a table, scattering papers. His second in command, Detective Mallory, would give him a knowing look, a silent acknowledgement of the strain, the Steelgraves, the untouchable dynasty, the Ice Prince, Adrian Steelgrave. His name, a chilling whisper in the back alleys, was always linked to Duval. Hartwell pored over the ledgers until the ink bled. He'd spent countless nights, fueled by black coffee and the gnawing frustration of a man on the edge, meticulously examining every transaction, every entry, every missing detail. Something wasn't adding up. Front businesses with no profit margins, crates moving through the docks at hours that made no sense, missing debtors who should have been stiffs floating in the bayou but weren't. He'd sent officers to the docks, to the warehouses, to the shadiest corners of the city, chasing shadows and dead ends. The thread wasn't liquor, it wasn't gambling, it was something older, something no one dared to say aloud. The whispered rumors, the hushed conversations, the fear that clung to the air around the Steelgraves like a shroud. He could feel it, the weight of something dark and ancient. Adrian could feel the walls tightening. The raids were growing closer. He could feel Hartwell's relentless pursuit, the lawman's hounds always nipping at their heels. The humans were getting smarter, at least. Hartwell was. He moved with the practiced efficiency of someone dealing with a problem he knew intimately. He burned the falsified records himself now, the flames licking at the paper, consuming the lies he had woven. He smoothed over his family's blood-stained trails, the scent of ash and deception clinging to his tailored suits, spun careful webs of lies to explain away the vanished debtors. He'd instruct his associates, the code words and secret meetings, a familiar ritual, but it was getting harder. Hartwell's hounds were always a corner away. Adrian felt a constant pressure, the knowledge that their carefully constructed facade was starting to crack. He'd stared himself in the mirror, his reflection, a stranger, a man consumed by the weight of his family's legacy. The worst part? Adrian was starting to wonder if maybe Hartwell deserved the truth. Maybe the lawman, with his relentless grit and stubborn morality, had earned something. Standing in the shadows of a city on fire, a sense of something wrong festered within him. Not friendship, not trust, but maybe a warning, a chance to step away before he stumbled into the mouth of the beast. Adrian paced in his opulent study, the lavish furnishings now a symbol of his gilded cage. He knew that the situation was growing desperate, yet Adrian said nothing. He maintained his carefully crafted mask of composure, his face a perfect blank. Because deep down beneath the centuries of duty, he wasn't sure if this life empire of dust and fear was really his. He'd watched his father, the patriarch of the Steelgraves, with a detached curiosity. He felt hollow and empty. His father would call it weakness. Adrian called it clarity. And the more he saw Hartwell's righteous fire, the more Adrian felt the edges of his loyalty begin to fray. A flicker of doubt, a seed of rebellion, began to take root in his soul, a dangerous and unwelcome guest, threatening to unravel everything he knew. In the low light of the Casa de Noapte, Sable watched Hartwell from behind her velvet curtain as he interrogated a dealer at her card table. The air was thick, with the scent of perfume and desperation. The rustling of cards, the hushed voices, and the tension in the room were palpable. His jaw was tight, his frustration simmering just under his skin. He was a man being slowly ground down, and she found that she rather enjoyed watching it. She should have been worried. The club's patrons, the shady deals, the secret meetings, all vulnerable to Hartwell's scrutiny. But Sable was not worried. Instead, she found herself smirking, swirling her glass lazily. Her red dress flowed over her curves, a splash of color in the dim room. She knew how to play the game. "Poor little hunter," she murmured, her voice a silken whisper, still chasing shadows. What neither of them knew was how close those shadows were to swallowing them whole. The intricate dance of deception, the hidden agendas, and the secrets buried deep beneath the city's streets were about to collide in a violent crescendo. The Steelgrave estate wasn't much to look at. From the outside, gray stone, iron gates, windows like slit eyes watching the city. But inside, it reeked of old power, thick and suffocating, a scent of dust and decay that clung to the back of Adrian's throat. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the cavernous foyer, a final, definitive click on his entry into the familial mausoleum. Constantine Steelgrave, patriarch and monster, ruled from the head of a long, dust-heavy table, a gathering of ancient, polished wood that seemed to absorb all light, a stark contrast to the vibrant city outside. He sat there like some half-dead king clutching his crumbling throne, his silver hair gleaming under the dim chandelier. The ornate carvings on the table seemed to leer, their silent judgment adding to the oppressive atmosphere. Adrian had sat at that table his entire life. He used to think he belonged there, a cog in the family machine, destined for a role he never questioned. The weight of tradition, of expectation, had been as familiar as his heartbeat. But tonight, the air was thicker, staler. A palpable tension crackled, sparking against his skin. The blood on the ledger weighed heavier. The scent of old secrets, of spilled blood and broken deals, was practically choking him. Adrian could taste the metallic tang of it at the back of his throat. His fingers, usually composed, were clenched beneath the table, fighting the urge to clench his jaw. "We're slipping," Adrian said flatly, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. His hands remained folded tight to keep from betraying the tremor in his pulse, the subtle shift in his resolve. He risked a glance at his father's impassive face, noting the way the light barely reflected. The humans are catching on. The constable's pushing harder. We need to scale back. Move quietly. Less muscle, more subtlety. His father sneered, the corners of his lips lifting to reveal the ghost of fangs, a horrifying reminder of their true nature. The older Steelgraves, with their elongated canines, seemed to almost relish taking down humans. Spoken like a man who's never tasted real fear. They should fear us, Adrian. The words were a low growl, a challenge, and a command wound into one. They already do. But fear without control is a noose tightening around our necks. Adrian fought the urge to let his gaze wander, recognizing the glares of some of his elders. The clink of crystal glasses, the rustle of expensive fabrics, all served to underline the immensity of the chasm that was growing between him and his family. The other elders murmured, a chorus of disapproval, a cacophony of dissent. Some were amused, recognizing the audacity in Adrian's words. Some were irritated, seeing his suggestions as a betrayal of their long-held traditions. None, however, were interested in changing centuries-old methods. Their blood ran deep, the tide of their power too vast to be denied. You want to coddle the humans? Constantine's voice dripped with venom, like a lethal poison. You sound like her, Sable. The name was unspoken, but her shadow lingered in the corners of every Steelgrave conversation, a phantom presence that challenged their dominance. A rival, a liability. A woman Adrian couldn't keep out of his thoughts or his veins. He could feel the subtle thrum of a different kind of fear, this time for her safety. He felt a shiver crawl up his spine. I want us to survive, Adrian said, his voice cold but measured, devoid of the anger he truly felt. He felt the heat rising in his chest, the anger suppressed, just below the surface, threatening to erupt. The game has changed. Hartwell's getting too close. The old ways won't hold forever. His father's eyes gleamed like polished bone, a predatory light in their depths. The room seemed to dim slightly, the energy of the old man intensifying. Then we burned them down before they reached the door. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The weight of the family's legacy, the violence, the unyielding commitment to supremacy, pressing down on him, threatening to drown him in its tide. Adrian's jaw flexed. His knuckles, beneath the table, had turned white. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a debate. This was a command, etched in stone, a decree that brooked no argument. It never was. But for the first time, Adrian didn't fold. A strange, unfamiliar resolution solidified within him, something he hadn't known he was capable of. His entire body felt both weary and wired at the same time. He stood, slowly, calmly. He felt the eyes of his family, each one like a laser, scrutinizing his every move, every breath. I'll handle it, my way. His father waved him off with a snort, already bored, already convinced his son would fall in line as he always had. The old man turned his attention to another, already forgetting the exchange. But as Adrian walked out of that suffocating mausoleum, something in his chest burned hotter than usual. Not rage, certainly not fear, resolve. He didn't go to the crosscut that night. The thought of another night of playing politics, of feigning loyalty, of pretending to be someone he wasn't, was more than he could bear. He went to the Casa de Noapte. The scent of jasmine and something else, something distinctly sable, hit him the moment he stepped inside, a stark contrast to the sterile, oppressive scent of his family estate. He could feel the tension in his shoulders begin to ease slightly. Sable was in her office, leaning over the books, her long fingers tracing numbers like they were battle plans. Adrian could almost see the gears in her mind turning, calculating, strategizing. The elegant lines of her profile, the way her dark hair fell across her shoulders, were a stark contrast to the cold, gray world he'd come from. She looked up, unsurprised, the way she always did when he came to find her. Her expression always hovered somewhere between mild irritation and dangerous curiosity when it came to him, a thrilling combination. To what do I owe the pleasure? She asked dryly, not bothering to rise. I need your mind, he said, blunt and unpolished, his words falling as rough as a hammer against the refined silence of her office. Flattery will get you nowhere. Her voice was smooth, a velvet whisper that sent a shiver down his spine. Your strategies, he clarified, lips twitching in a reluctant smile. Your modern approach. You've built something that survives without bloodshed. I need that. She set her pen down slowly, the movement deliberate and almost theatrical. She was studying him with that unreadable gaze, her eyes dark pools that held 1,000 secrets. The faint scent of her perfume, a mix of sandalwood and something sharp, something wild, filled the air, drawing him in. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath, waiting for her judgment. And what will your father think of this little enlightenment? The words were laced with a hint of amusement, but the underlying question was clear. Are you ready to betray everything? He doesn't have to know. Adrian stepped closer, drawn by an undeniable force, something dangerous glinting behind his carefully guarded eyes. Not yet. Sable tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she wasn't sure was worth solving. So you finally realized you don't want to be his weapon. Maybe I don't want to be anything at all. The words were a confession, a release, and a challenge all rolled into one. That made her smile, brief, sharp, like the glint of a blade just before it cuts. The air crackled with their shared understanding, the unspoken acknowledgement of the road ahead. Careful, Adrian. A man with no purpose is a man who gets eaten alive in this city. Then, maybe you can teach me how not to get eaten. His voice was a low rumble, a promise, not a plea. He could feel himself drawing closer to the edge, teetering on the precipice of a new life. She let the silence stretch, savoring the taste of his quiet rebellion. The air between them was thick with unspoken possibilities. Come back tomorrow, she said, turning back to her books, her pen already poised above the parchment. We'll see if you're worth saving. He didn't smile. He didn't thank her. He didn't allow himself to betray his own emotions. The choice had been made. The die cast. He simply nodded, a simple acknowledgement of the gauntlet she had thrown down, and left, knowing full well that the line he just crossed could never be uncrossed. The weight of the decision pressed upon him, but it was strangely invigorating, and maybe that's why it felt so damn good. The cold touch of tradition, the suffocating weight of expectation, seemed to finally release him, and he felt the phantom pains of his old life beginning to fade. He had a new path now, even if that path was uncertain. But for the first time, he felt in control, and the world seemed newly, dangerously, ripe with possibilities. The first sign of trouble was the quiet. New Orleans was never quiet, not in the corner Sable Duval called hers. But tonight, the usual chorus, the music, the soft laughter, the shuffle of quick deals and quicker lovers fell silent in the casa. It was the kind of silence that arrived with wolves. Sable knew better than to ignore it. Her second in command, Morella, approached with tight lips and quick steps. They're here, from Chicago, O'Connell's men. Sable didn't look up from her ledger. How many? A dozen, maybe more. They're staking the place out, watching the girls, bold as hell. Sable's fingers paused on the page, Chicago. She'd heard whispers of their push south, but she hadn't expected them to be so brazen. Not in her house. She closed the book with a soft snap and rose, smoothing her dress with clinical precision. Pull the girls off the floor, she ordered. Lock the back exits. No one leaves, no one enters without my word. Morella hesitated. And the Steelgraves? They're not my concern. But the tug deep in her bones disagreed. That damn bond. She shoved the thought aside. She didn't need Adrian Steelgrave. Not here. Not now. But Adrian knew anyway. Word traveled fast in their world. Faster when it involved her. When the whispers reached him, O'Connell's boys sniffing around the casa, he didn't think. He simply moved. He told himself it was duty. Territory. Control. But somewhere under that lie, he knew. He was already hers. His father would call him a fool. A traitor. But, as Adrian slipped through the dark streets, the pull in his chest grew heavier, tighter. The bond was tightening its noose. The first violent tremor struck the casa, like a physical blow. The front doors, crafted from mahogany and reinforced with iron, splintered inward with a deafening crash that shattered the silence. The ornate glass panels exploded in a glittering spray as a wave of Chicago vampires poured into the foyer. Their faces were predatory, their eyes glinting in the dim light cast by the gas lamps. The air instantly thickened, a metallic tang of blood already mingling with the expensive perfumes and the lingering scent of the evening's revelry. Inside, the scene transformed into a maelstrom of controlled chaos. A scream, abruptly cut short, echoed from an upper floor. A chandelier dislodged by the force plummeted to the floor, its crystals scattering like a macabre rain. Tables and chairs were overturned, creating a treacherous obstacle course of splintered wood and shattered porcelain. Faint screams of terror and the guttural growls of the attackers filled the spaces between the clashes. The O'Connell vampires, wielding long knives and specialized weapons with a sinister efficiency, moved with the predatory grace of wolves. One unfortunate patron, caught in the crossfire, was thrown across the room, his face a mask of shock, as crimson blossomed across his silk shirt. The back entrance of the casa echoed with the sound of a panicked cry, as the Chicago vampires, having bypassed the front, unleashed their fury upon the defenseless staff. One of the security guards, a burly man named Victor, was thrown against the wall but managed to fight against the assault. Sable's most able vampire guards and the few remaining patrons transformed into a whirlwind of violence, fought with desperate ferocity. Their movements were a blur, a dance of death punctuated by the sickening crack of blades, rending flesh, and the dull snap of bones giving way. The scent of blood thick, metallic, and suffocating permeated every corner of the casa, a grotesque testament to the carnage that had erupted. She met him at the casa's back entrance, her arms crossed, her expression sharp and unimpressed. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should they." His voice was a low growl, barely masking the fury that warred within him. Her eyes flicked over his crisp suit, his calm face, his two steady hands. "What's this? The Steelgraves sending their reluctant prince to handle the riffraff? I came on my own." That surprised her. She didn't show it, but it sat heavy in the air between them. A crash of splintered wood and a chorus of screams rattled the back door. The sounds of violence penetrated the air as the battle waged on within the casa. "Get in here now!" she hissed. "You think you can stop them alone?" she asked. "Not alone." He stepped past her, into the plush halls of the casa, his voice dropping like a blade. "With you." A strange beat passed something almost like trust, almost like inevitability. "You're going to get yourself killed," she said flatly. He smirked. "Wouldn't be the worst way to go." From across the street, Chief Constable Hartwell watched the shadows gathering, the wrong kinds of men slipping into the wrong kinds of places. The Casa de Noapt, Sable Duval's fortress. His gut screamed that something was about to break wide open, and this time, he wasn't going to miss it. He checked his pistol, crossed the street, and slipped inside unaware that the world he knew was about to shatter. The war was about to start. The blood was about to spill. And Adrian Steelgrave was standing exactly where he'd sworn he never would beside Sable Duval, ready to burn the world for her. The O'Connell enforcers didn't bother knocking. They kicked the doors open like they'd already won. Steel and muscle flooded the Casa de Noaptis foyer Chicago brutes, freshly turned, hungry for territory, shotguns, machetes, smirks like they owned the place. The air thickened with the stench of cheap whiskey and stale sweat, soon to be overwhelmed by the coppery tang of blood. "Steelgrave," their leader barked, eyes sweeping over the gilded walls, the velvet curtains, the delicate chandeliers. "Thought you boys were too pretty to bleed." Adrian stepped forward, calm as glass, his cufflinks gleaming in the low light. His voice, when he spoke, was a soft caress against the rising tide of violence. "Oh, I bleed," he said softly. "Just not for you." The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Well, you will tonight." Then the room exploded. The first gunshot ripped through the silence, a thunderclap of chaos. Adrian moved before the echo faded, a blur of speed and sharp violence. He was a wraith in a tailored suit, an elegant predator unleashed. He ripped a shotgun from the nearest thug's hands, the metal groaning in his grip as he twisted the weapon. With a backhand that was more force than gesture, He shattered the man's jaw, sending him spiraling across the polished floor in a grotesque, unnatural spin, a shattered puppet. Sable was already moving a wraith of her own. Her blade, a silver whisper in the dim light, sang through the air, slicing tendons and throats with brutal efficiency. Each movement was a study in ruthless precision, a ballet of death. Her heels clicked like gunshots on the marble as she spun, kicked, stabbed, a whirlwind of lethal elegance. The air filled with the wet thud of impacts, the screams of the dying. They fought like they'd done this before, like they'd always been meant to fight together. Adrian didn't hold back. He let the monster loose. He felt the change, the primal hunger rising, the need to tear and rend. He crushed ribs with his bare hands, the bones snapping like dry twigs under immense pressure. His claws, usually sheathed, extended, tearing through flesh with savage grace. The scent of blood was thick and metallic, igniting something primal, something ancient, in him. He reveled in it. He needed it. One of the Chicago thugs, momentarily forgetting his fear, drove a machete toward Sable's back, the blade glinting wickedly. Adrian caught the blade mid-swing, feeling the force of the blow as the man strained, muscles bulging. Then, with a contemptuous twist of his wrist, Adrian snapped the attacker's wrist with a satisfying crack. The man shrieked, dropping the machete. Their eyes met in that brutal moment, a shared understanding forged in the fires of combat. "You're late?" Sable growled, her voice a low, dangerous purr as she slashed her next opponent across the belly, the blade drawing a crimson line. "Fashionably," Adrian replied, his voice a flat counterpoint to the chaos. Another shotgun blast shattered a mirror near his head, sending shards of glass raining down. Adrian turned, grabbed the shooter by the throat, and, with a grunt of effort, hurled him through the remaining glass with enough force to fold him in half. The body crumpled on the other side, a broken mess. The casa was a war zone now. Silk curtains hung in tatters, shredded by bullets and claws, bodies strewn like broken dolls, crimson soaking into the Persian rugs, staining the opulence with the harsh reality of death. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood, mingled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the heavy musk of fear. The elegant chandeliers swayed precariously, casting dancing shadows on the carnage. And in the middle of it all, Hartwell stood frozen. He'd kicked in a side door, pistol drawn, expecting thugs, expecting bootleggers. Not this. Not vampires moving like ghosts, tearing through men like paper. His hands shook, the gun wavering uselessly. His breath stuttered, shallow and ragged. This wasn't a crime. This was something else. Something horrifyingly, impossibly different. His eyes locked on Sable, her beauty, her savagery, her otherness, and a primal dread seized him. Adrian noticed the constable's gaze, the man's terror. One of the Chicago enforcers, a hulking brute, scrambled to his feet, aiming a shotgun squarely at Hartwell's chest, oblivious to the danger. The constable hadn't even seen him. Adrian moved. Too fast. He slammed into the enforcer, fangs bared, rage ripping through him like wildfire. They crashed to the ground, grappling viciously, the enforcer snarling and clawing, his face contorted with a desperate, animalistic fury. The enforcer's teeth snapped inches from Adrian's throat, a desperate attempt to survive. Adrian pinned him, snarling, and with a savage lunge, he tore the man's head clean off, the sound of cracking bone and tearing flesh echoing in the sudden silence. Blood splattered across Hartwell's boots, a grotesque, crimson baptism. Adrian stood, panting, eyes burning, the monster still raging within. The scent of blood was intoxicating, but he fought to control the hunger. "You're welcome," he rasped, the words a guttural echo. Hartwell's mouth opened, closed. His whole world had just tilted on its axis, shattering into a million pieces. You're one of them," he stammered, the words barely audible. Adrian's voice was ice, the control barely holding. "No, I'm worse." Before Hartwell could recover, Adrian was gone, already moving to Sable's side as they dispatched the last of the intruders, a final, brutal act of coordinated violence. A last gasp of a dying man was cut short by a perfectly aimed kick from Sable, and the silence returned. Silence settled over the carnage. The casa, cracked and blood-stained, still stood. The opulence was stained with gore. The air, though still heavy with the smell of death, began to cool as the adrenaline faded. Sable turned to Adrian, something raw flickering in her cold eyes, a hint of vulnerability. You didn't have to save him. He was in my way. His voice was neutral, devoid of emotion. It'll be a problem now. Adrian looked toward the shaken lawman, already backing toward the door like he'd seen a ghost, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Let him be, Adrian murmured. He'll come looking for answers. Let him find us. A beat passed, just the sound of dripping blood and the slow, ragged breath-retting of their breathing. I didn't ask for this, Sable whispered, and Adrian wasn't sure if she meant the fight, the mess, or him. Neither did I. His voice softened, the faintest edge of something almost like regret coloring his words. But here we are. Their bond throbbed in the space between them, undeniable, inescapable. And for the first time, neither of them stepped away. They were bound, two predators in a gilded cage of their own making, and now they had a witness. The Casa de Noapte's grand hall was a mausoleum of defeat, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of burnt gunpowder. The chandeliers, once gleaming jewels, hung at precarious angles, their crystal prisms reflecting distorted images of the carnage. Silk curtains, once draped in decadent folds, were now shredded, fluttering in the currents created by the open, shattered windows. Persian rugs, once a sea of opulent crimson, were soaked deep in a darker shade, stained with the lifeblood of those who had dared to challenge Sable's reign. Sable surveyed the wreckage with a practiced eye, her movements graceful despite the chaos. Her gaze swept over the ruin, categorizing the damage, already calculating what could be salvaged and what would need to burn. This wasn't just a room. It was a testament to the power she wielded and the price of holding it. Each splinter of wood, each stain on the floorboards, told a story of the battle. She knew every inch of this space, every angle of attack, every hidden passage. This very hall had witnessed countless clandestine meetings, whispered deals, and moments of both pleasure and pain. And now, it was a battlefield. Adrian stood a few feet away, a study in controlled composure amidst the wreckage. He wiped his hands on a pristine linen cloth, now streaked with crimson, the vivid stain a stark contrast to the crisp white. His breathing was low and measured, a testament to his iron will, betraying none of the exertion of having torn through half a dozen of their rival enforcers. His jaw was tight, his usual sardonic smirk buried beneath a layer of seriousness. A long, heavy silence descended, punctuated only by the crackling of the dying embers in the hearth and the distant, muffled symphony of the city outside, the faint wail of a siren, the rumble of a passing carriage, the ever-present hum of a metropolis that never slept. Finally, Sable broke the silence, her voice sharp, yet carrying a fragile edge. I told you not to come, she said, her voice cold, but thinner somehow, frayed at the edges like a worn tapestry. And I didn't listen. Adrian's smirk, usually a weapon, was faint, weary, worn like the armor he no longer trusted. You've noticed I'm terrible at that by now. Her heels clicked on the blood-slicked floor as she crossed the ruined space, stepping over the fallen bodies with a chilling lack of hesitation. The movement was fluid, practiced, and betrayed no emotion. She began pulling down the remaining drapes, tossing them into a large, tangled heap, a macabre pyre, setting the stage for the cleansing fire that would erase the evidence of the night's brutal events. The scent of gunpowder and blood mixed with the cloying sweetness of the expensive perfume that still clung to the drapes. Why did you? She asked, her back still turned to him. She didn't want to see his face, didn't want to hear his response until after the question had been voiced. Adrian exhaled slowly, his hands tightening at his sides, the tendons in his forearms flexing beneath his pale skin. He hadn't moved from his spot, but the quiet intensity in his features was palpable across the room. Because they would have killed you, and you would have let them take me if you could have stomached it. You're not wrong. The words, when they came, were clipped and devoid of any softness. That made her pause. She turned slowly, her gaze meeting his, the same infuriating mix of ice-cold logic and something else, something neither of them dared name. The flickering gas lamps cast long, dancing shadows across their faces, distorting their features, concealing as much as they revealed. "I can't afford to owe you," she said, each word sharp, deliberate, a defensive wall against whatever was simmering beneath the surface. "You don't." He took a step closer, his voice softening, the mask he usually wore beginning to slip. "I didn't do it for a debt, not for family, not for politics." Then why? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating, laden with the stench of gunpowder and the ghosts of unspoken desires. It was a question that had been lurking in the shadows for a long time. His answer, when it came, was stripped bare, devoid of embellishment. "Because I couldn't not." Sable hated the sudden, searing heat that flared in her chest, a betrayal of her carefully constructed facade. She hated the faint tremor that ran down her spine, a telltale sign of vulnerability. She hated the implicit bond that was no longer quiet, no longer easy to push down, to ignore. She wanted to keep hating him. It would have been safer, more controlled, less messy. Instead, with a gesture, she handed him the matchbook, the small worn item a symbol of the irrevocable shift between then. "If you're so set on saving me, you can help light the fire." Adrian took the matchbook, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest electric second. The spark of contact sent a jolt through her, a sensation that registered deep in her bones. The scent of sulfur and heat filled the air. Neither of them flinched this time. They stood in the carnage, two islands in a sea of death and destruction, connected by more than just shared experiences. The fire roared to life, consuming the velvet and mahogany, the silks and shadows, erasing the night's sins as quickly as they had been carved. The flames licked at the ceiling, casting dancing shadows. The heat intensified, forcing them to step back. The smell of burning wood and cloth filled the air, mixing with the lingering scent of blood. Together, they worked the cleanup like seasoned soldiers, their movements synchronized, their shared purpose unspoken. They dragged bodies, their faces grim, their muscles straining with the weight of the fallen. They burned ledgers, erasing the paper trails that could lead to the city's human hounds who would seek to bring them to justice. They wiped away every trace, every speck of evidence that could bring the city's human eyes too close, too curious. The silence between them was no longer cold, no longer a shield. It was something else now. Something charged, something waiting to break like a brewing storm. The clinking of glass as they collected shattered bottles, the soft rustle of fabric as they moved the bodies of the fallen, the crackle and hiss of the flames, they were the only sounds that remained. "You'll need to rebuild," Adrian said finally, watching the flames dance and consume the evidence of the struggle. "I always do." The words were flat, but the tension in the air was building. "You won't have to do it alone." She turned towards him, and the steel was still there, but the cracks had started to show. Something unreadable flickered in her gaze, a flicker that could have been hope or a dangerous invitation. "Don't make promises, Steelgrave," she warned, her voice a low growl, a warning against the impulse to reach for more. "You're terrible at keeping them." "Maybe this time," he said softly, meeting her gaze and not looking away. "Maybe this time I'll try." She almost smiled. The corners of her lips twitched, a momentary lapse that hinted at a deeper connection. Almost. The bond tugged between them, a chain half pulled taut, stretching and straining. They didn't speak of fate. They didn't need to. They both felt it pressing on their ribs, seeping into their bones. The echoes of the fight, the lingering smell of smoke, the unspoken promise of the future, they were all intertwined. And though neither dared admit it yet, the city's shadows would come for them. The Chicago clan, with its bloodthirsty ambition and insatiable greed, wasn't finished. The Steelgraves, with their suffocating possessiveness, wouldn't let Adrian stray completely. The law, slow but relentless, was circling, always hungry, always watching. But for tonight, they had the ashes, and they had each other. For tonight, in the smoky, dim-lit aftermath of the battle, they were an island, a fortress, bound together by secrets and shadows, their destinies intertwined in a dance with fate. The whiskey burned his throat, But Hartwell didn't stop. He poured another, the amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The glass trembled faintly in his hand. Not from fear, not anymore. Something worse. Doubt. A gnawing, insidious worm that had taken root in the pit of his stomach and was slowly, relentlessly, devouring its way outwards. He'd seen things that night, things that clawed at the edges of his sanity, things he wasn't meant to see, things that didn't fit in police reports or courtroom testimonies, things that strained the limits of human understanding, things with teeth, razor sharp, gleaming, and designed for tearing, things with impossible speed, a blink and you miss it blur across the moonlight, things with impossible strength, smashing through brick and bone with a casual ease that sent a shiver down his spine, even now, hours later, and her, Sable Duval. The name, once a pleasant melody in his mind, now echoed with the sharp tang of blood and the chill of the crypt. Sable, painted in blood and moonlight, moving like a predator through the smoke-filled alley, a creature of grace and lethal intent. God help him, he still wanted her. The thought, unwanted, unwelcome, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He clenched his jaw, the muscles in his neck rigid. He had a wife back home, a life, a duty. And yet, the image of Sable, the memory of her dark, knowing eyes, her haunting smile, lingered, a siren's call leading him towards the rocks. Hartwell slammed the empty glass onto the desk, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet office. His knuckles were white, his chest tight. What was he supposed to do? Drag a vampire into court? Submit a warrant for a woman who could rip him apart before he could even unholster his gun? The very idea was preposterous, laughable. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the gesture a familiar sign of frustration. He'd spent years thinking he was cleaning up the street-scrushing bootleggers, shaking down bookies, hunting the rot, the corruption that festered beneath the veneer of respectability. But the rot wasn't just in the speakeasies and gambling dens. It was in the law, too. Corrupt judges, bought cops. He knew them. He'd seen them, the whispers and the payoffs. And sometimes, the silence. Hell, some of them probably knew what the Steelgraves were. Maybe they were just happy the monsters kept to their corners, as long as they didn't make too much noise. It made things easier. Controlled. Hartwell wasn't stupid. He'd been in the game too long to believe in perfect justice. He'd seen too much wrong, too much pain, but this was something else. The Steelgraves, the others, they played by different rules. Rules that had nothing to do with warrants or evidence or due process they just took. And if they chose to take him, there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. A slow breath rattled through him, the whiskey momentarily forgotten. Expose them. It was his job, wasn't it? His duty. He'd sworn to uphold the law, to protect the innocent. That damn oath. It had been everything. But what then? The chaos? Panic in the streets? Blood in the gutters? A feeding frenzy as the creatures of the night reveled in their freedom? The fragile balance was shattered because some stubborn lawman couldn't keep his nose out of the shadows. He thought of the headlines, the panic, the inevitable bloodshed. He thought of the faces of the terrified citizens he was sworn to protect, of the screaming, the chaos, the death. And Sable, what would happen to her? Would she become a target, a pariah, or would she perhaps thrive in the new order? The thought, tinged with both horror and a strange, inexplicable thrill, tightened his chest. His grip loosened, his fist unclenched. He stared out the window, the neon lights of the city blurring through the rain-streaked glass. That was the problem, wasn't it? He didn't just want to protect the city. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to save her, and that made him weak, or human. He wasn't sure anymore. The police station buzzed around him, the familiar sounds a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. A phone rang, a shrill, insistent cry that echoed through the corridor. A typewriter clacked rhythmically in the outer office. The staccato beat a steady counterpoint to the chaos of the night. He could smell the stale coffee, the lingering scent of tobacco smoke, and the faint disinfectant that clung to the walls. The city's heartbeat thumped faintly outside his window cars, rumbling, distant jazz bleeding from the clubs, the low pulse of a world that would keep turning whether Hartwell made the right choice or not. He needed to talk to someone. He reached for the phone. He needed to trust someone. He hesitated, then dialed a familiar number. Sergeant O'Malley. The one person he still trusted, the one person he could let his guard down with. Hartwell, O'Malley's gruff voice answered after the third ring. O'Malley, I need to see you. Hartwell kept his voice low, careful not to reveal too much over the phone line. What's up? Sounds like trouble. More than you know. Can you get down to the station, the back room? Be there in 15. Hartwell hung up the phone and lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dim office, the smoke curling upwards like a ghostly shroud. The air filled with the familiar acrid smell, a momentary respite from the cold, hard truth he was facing. Damn it, he muttered, the word a raw whisper in the silence. If he walked away now, if he buried the evidence, turned his back, he'd be breaking the oath he'd sworn to uphold. He'd be abandoning everything he believed in, all the years of sacrifice, the countless nights spent chasing shadows. But maybe the oath wasn't enough. Maybe the system wasn't enough. Maybe it was broken beyond repair. Maybe some devils were necessary. His thoughts drifted back to Adrian Steelgrave, how the vampire had saved his life, swiftly, brutally, without hesitation. The memory was a stark reminder of the impossible choices he now faced. He didn't have the whole story yet. He knew there was something more, something the world wasn't supposed to see. But he had had enough. He had seen enough, and it wasn't black and white anymore. It wasn't good versus evil. It was all blood and bourbon. He heard a knock at the door. O'Malley. Hartwell? Come in, Mick. O'Malley entered, his face etched with concern, his eyes scanning the room. What's the trouble, John? Hartwell met his gaze, the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders like a worn coat. I've been seeing things, Mick, he admitted, the words barely a rasp. Things that don't make sense. He proceeded to tell O'Malley everything, leaving out no details, the fear and the shock still lingering in his voice. The sergeant listened, his expression shifting from disbelief to growing horror. So, you're saying vampires? Hartwell nodded grimly. What do you think we should do? O'Malley asked after a long, uncomfortable silence. Tomorrow, Hartwell said, standing to his feet and grabbing his hat. Tomorrow, I'll tell my superiors the case is cold. We got nothing to go on. And then? Then we start again. But this time, we ask the right questions, not the official ones. The right questions, the ones that could get him killed, or worse. And the other question, the one that tormented him, what to do about Sable. And tomorrow, he'd see her again. He didn't know if he wanted to stop her or save her. Adrian always knew his bloodline would try to kill him someday. He just didn't expect it to start with his kin. The meeting at the Steelgrave estate reeked of false civility. Crystal decanters, polished oak, knives under every smile. The air itself seemed heavy, thick with unspoken threats and carefully cultivated mistrust. Shadows danced in the periphery, elongated by the chandeliers, whispering secrets only they could understand. His cousin, Marcus Steelgrave, though the name could change, a cruel family joke sat across from him, draped in velvet and arrogance, swirling bourbon like a crown prince who'd already won the throne. His eyes, the same unnerving shade of gray as Adrian's own, held a calculating gleam. You've been distracted, Adrian. Marcus's voice was like silk dragged over a blade, each word precisely chosen to wound. Your little fixation with the Romanian whore is starting to embarrass the family. A subtle rustle of papyra concealed document undoubtedly accompanied the venomous pronouncement. The barely audible sound amplified the tension, a physical manifestation of the brewing conflict. Adrian's jaw flexed, a muscle twitching beneath his flawless skin. The metallic tang of fear, sharp and acrid, pricked at the back of his throat. Careful, Marcus. You're only standing because I allow it. Ah, but you won't always be able to, will you? The words slid out, a viper's hiss. There it was, the crack in the armor, the open threat. Marcus leaned in, the candlelight reflecting in his predatory eyes. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, mirroring the slow, deliberate drip of ice melting in his glass. You've forgotten what we are. You want to modernize? You want to partner with them? He spat the word like it burned his tongue, the sound echoing in the cavernous room. We don't build bridges with humans, cousin. We feed on them. Adrian's voice dropped, cold as the grave, each syllable a carefully aimed weapon. The scent of aged wood and expensive cologne did nothing to mask the acrid stench of danger. Maybe that's why you've been losing influence in the North Docks. Clinging to the old ways, gnawing on the scraps while I build something that lasts. The silence snapped taut between them, a palpable force. In the distance, a dog's bark, sharp and sudden, sliced through the suffocating stillness. You always were. Your father's favorite, Marcus said, his smile brittle, barely concealing the rage simmering beneath. But favorites fall fast when the ground is cut out beneath them. Adrian's eyes flicked, almost imperceptibly, to the enforcers, standing a little too close to Marcus's chair. Muscled figures, the air around them radiating threat, their eyes betraying a hunger for violence. The subtle shift of a hand towards a concealed weapon, the barely audible click of a safety being disengaged. Ah, so that's how it would be. The rustle of fabric, the subtle creak of leather, the symphony of impending death. When Adrian rose, the room tensed. The scrape of chairs, the collective intake of breath. Hands drifted toward hidden weapons, the air charged with unspoken promises of bloodshed. The metallic scent of impending violence grew stronger, a suffocating blanket, but he only straightened his cufflinks, his movements slow and deliberate, radiating a terrifying boredom. He ran a hand through his hair, a casual gesture that belied the ice freezing in his veins. The silence stretched, a taut wire strung between them. Tell me something, Marcus. He paused at the door, the shadows of the hallway beckoning, his smirk glacial, a promise of retribution carved in stone. The very air seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the inevitable explosion. Did you bring enough men? Marcus's silence was answer enough. His face, momentarily devoid of its carefully cultivated mask of composure, betrayed a flash of something. Fear? Doubt? It was gone in an instant, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. By midnight, Adrian had confirmed what he already suspected. Marcus wasn't just scheming, he was moving with the practiced efficiency of a predator. Clandestine meetings whispered in the dead of night. Old family enforcers, bribed, their loyalty purchased with promises of power and riches. Supply lines sabotaged, their resources strangled. An unspoken contract with the rival Chicago clan to split the spoils once Adrian was dead and buried. A betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. Worse, their whispers, the rustle of pages, the furtive glances. They were targeting Sable next. She was the weakness Marcus intended to exploit. And the thought of her, trapped in their crosshairs, sent a jolt of icy fury through Adrian's veins. When Adrian stormed into the Casa's rebuilt main hall, the scent of fresh paint and defiance still clinging to the air, Sable didn't flinch at his thunderous entrance. Her eyes, the color of a storm brewing over the sea, met his with an unnerving calmness. The low hum of the city, the distant sirens, the muted sounds of the staff, none of it penetrated her focused stillness. She didn't flinch when he told her the news. Family's coming for both of us now, he said, his voice low and grim, the words hanging heavy in the air. He could feel the weight of impending battle, the crushing pressure of betrayal, the familiar taste of ash in his mouth. They'll tear down everything. You, me, the whole damn city if it suits them. Sable's only response was a faint, sharp smile, a curve of the lips that held no fear, only an ironclad resolve. She thrived in the kill zone. She always had. Good, she said, her voice a low, purring challenge that sent a shiver down his spine. Let them come. But as Adrian poured a drink, neither of them caring that the bourbon still held the scent of old smoke, the ghosts of past battles mingling with the present threat they both knew. This was no longer just business. This was survival. And neither of them trusted anyone but each other. He'd be damned if he let anyone else do either. Hartwell didn't know why he came. Maybe he was looking for answers. Maybe he was looking for her. He didn't expect to find both, waiting like wolves at the Casa de Noapta. The opulent space was cloaked in a deceptive quiet. Thick velvet curtains, the color of dried blood, swallowed the light from the street, leaving the room in a perpetual twilight. A single ornate chandelier cast long, dancing shadows that stretched and warped the figures within. The air tasted of expensive perfume, fine tobacco, and something elsy metallic tang that prickled at the back of Hartwell's throat, a subtle reminder of the predators he was amongst. Adrian Steelgrave lounged in one of Sable's leather chairs, the plush cushions doing little to soften the hard lines of his frame. His expression was unreadable, etched in the dim light, but his stillness was deadly. Every muscle seemed coiled, held in check by a force of will that was almost palpable. Sable perched on the edge of her desk, one leg crossed over the other, her posture seemingly calm, but Hartwell knew better. She was always coiled, ready to strike. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Now he saw it in the way her fingers, long and elegant, tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the polished wood. You asked to meet, unarmed. Hartwell's hand, despite his best efforts, hovered near his coat, a familiar gesture of habit. He could almost feel the familiar cold steel of his service weapon against his palm. Figured I'd hear you out before I put a stake in your ribs. Adrian's smirk was bone dry, a flicker of amusement across his otherwise impassive face. How refreshingly optimistic of you. Sable's dark eyes flicked over Hartwell, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. They moved over him like blades, cataloging, judging. There's no point threatening you anymore, Constable. If you were going to come for us, you'd have done it already. Her voice was a low, melodious purr that did not detract from the underlying steel. It seemed to absorb the shadows around them. And Hartwell crossed his arms, his pulse steady, despite the growl of danger still thick in the air. The air itself felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of unspoken truths and lethal secrets. We want a deal, Adrian said flatly, his voice cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. Full disclosure, full honesty, no games. Hartwell's eyebrow lifted, a silent question. Since when do bloodsuckers play fair? The words were a challenge, a deliberate attempt to bait them, to gauge their reaction. Adrian didn't rise to the bait. His features remained smooth, undisturbed. Since the alternative is a war that burns the city down. The words hung between them, heavy and sharp, a tangible threat that settled in the room like a shroud. Hartwell could almost taste the smoke, the acrid smell of burning flesh and twisted metal. Sable's voice slid in, colder than the night air. Your humans already believe there's organized crime pulling the strings. They're not wrong, but they have no idea what they're hunting. No idea how deep the roots go. Enlighten me, Hartwell said, his throat suddenly dry. He swallowed, acutely aware of the pounding of his heart. Adrian's eyes gleamed, something ancient flickering beneath the surface, a glimpse into a cold, timeless power. The vampires in this city, Steelgraves, Chicago clans, the old blood, they've been here longer than Prohibition, longer than the city itself. We built the underworld. We keep it balanced. Balanced? Hartwell scoffed, the word laced with disbelief. You're parasites. Sable didn't blink. Her gaze remained locked on Hartwell, unwavering. We're survivors. We take just enough to keep the peace. We police our own. We don't need to kill to feed. And most of us don't want to. The ones who do, she let the subtle threat linger, her lips curving just slightly. We handle them. Hartwell's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. He could feel the pressure building behind his eyes as he considered what he was hearing. And now, Adrian continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, that balance is cracking. My family's splintering. The old guard is clawing for power. Outside, clans are moving in. If you take us down, someone worse will replace us. Someone who won't care about balance. They'll butcher this city in the open. So what? I just let you keep running your empire in exchange for a few quiet streets? Hartwell's voice was ice, the challenge clear. He wouldn't be easily swayed, but the image of the city bathed in chaos, the blood of innocents staining the cobblestone streets, was a potent motivator. No, Adrian said. You help us dismantle the parts that need to go. You help us root out the ones who are too dangerous to stay. And in return, we keep the lid on the rest. We give you enough wins to keep your badge clean. We give you peace. And I keep my mouth shut about what you are. Hartwell's gaze flicked to Sable, lingering just a second too long. A silent query, an unspoken accusation. He knew their secret. He knew her secret. And about you. Exactly. Her lips quirked in something that almost looked like amusement, a dangerous curve that sent a shiver down his spine. Besides, you've already been compromised. Don't think I haven't noticed. Hartwell's jaw ticked, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. He couldn't deny it. He'd seen too much, known too much. The truth was a poison that had already begun to seep into his veins. He hated that they were right. He hated that some part of him, the part that was tired of the endless cycle of violence and corruption, didn't want to destroy them. He was tired of the carnage, the endless string of deaths. He was also tired of the dark secrets that the humans held. But more than that, he hated the thought of the city drowning in something far worse, something that would devour everything he held dear. You expect me to trust you? He voiced the unspoken question. Adrian rose slowly, his movements fluid and graceful. His presence filled the room, a shadow that seemed to expand with his every step. The ornate details of the room seemed to fade, the rich decor losing to his overwhelming presence. The air grew colder, heavier, and Hartwell felt a primal unease crawl up his spine. No, we expect you to need us. Hartwell's silence was all the answer they needed. The unspoken understanding, the shared burden, hung in the air, thick and heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but resolute, a testament to the hard decisions he'd made and the tougher road ahead. Fine, I'm in. But if you turn on me, Sable's smirk was razor sharp, a warning and a promise, all rolled into one. Oh, darling, you'll know. The city hummed like a loaded gun. Every alley, every whispered deal, every shadow, it all stank of betrayal. Adrian felt the tension coil in his gut, a familiar ache that came with knowing the streets held the very promise of death. The air, thick with the scent of coal, smoke, and desperation, seemed to tighten around him with each passing hour. Adrian, Sable, and Hartwell were strange bedfellows, but the uneasy alliance was the only thing keeping them breathing. The fragile truce, held together by mutual desperation and a shared enemy, felt more like a tightrope walk over a chasm. They'd forged these alliances based on necessity, not trust. They had a target now, Marcus Steelgrave. But the bastard wasn't working alone. The betrayal resonated with the raw, gut-wrenching fear that permeated the whole operation. The Chicago clan had sunk their claws deep, feeding Marcus muscle, money, and an escape route. They were a festering wound in the city's underbelly, and Marcus was the parasite that allowed them to grow. Finding him wasn't the hard part. Finding him would be easier. Catching him before he scorched the city? That was the game. A game played for lives. North docks are locked down, Hartwell muttered, his voice a low growl that barely masked the urgency. The map, spread across the table in the smoky back room of the Casa de Noapte, was illuminated by the erratic flicker of the chandelier. Each flickering light cast dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. He scanned the crumpled parchment, his eyes darting from one marked point to another. He's got his security, but also half your family's old guard guarding the warehouses. Chicago hitters spotted nearby. The gravity of the situation was etched into the lines of Hartwell's face. The lawman was no stranger to the city's underbelly. Adrian's fist clenched, the knuckles white. The betrayal burned a hole in his resolve. He's consolidating. He's going to flip the ports, lock out the Steelgrave name, and funnel fresh blood straight to the Chicago clan. The implications were dire. Loss of control, power, and blood. Sable's eyes glimmered with cold calculation, reflecting the chandelier's light. Her voice, usually silky, was clipped and precise. And I imagine you like to stop that from happening. Each word was a calculated strike. Personally, I like to rip his spine out, Adrian said dryly, the venom in his voice a warning. But I'm open to other suggestions. He envisioned the act, but knew the long game was the better play. Hartwell jabbed a thick finger at the warehouse block on the map. This is where we hit. We push him hard here. He'll panic. He'll run. This was how it started. And when he runs, Sable finished, her voice as smooth as a razor. He'll lead us straight to his masters. Her gaze locked onto Adrian's, a silent confirmation of their shared strategy. It wasn't just a takedown, it was a chessboard of alliances, payoffs, and favors called in from the dirtiest corners of the city. The clock was ticking, the stakes were high. Sable leaned on her bordello informants, the women in her employ, each a master of observation and discreet communication. Whispers and warnings filtered through the city's network, each piece of information a crucial thread in the web they were weaving. Hartwell bent the law until it nearly snapped, his network of crooked cops and willing judges greased with promises and threats. Adrian bribed, threatened, and twisted arms until the streets themselves whispered where Marcus would flee. Night after night, they bled the traitor's support dry. The city was being torn apart, and the trio was the only thing holding it together. Raids, intercepted shipments, faked meetings that ended with Chicago enforcers burned to ash in back alleys, the night swallowing their screams. The city echoed with the sounds of violence, a symphony composed of gunshots, breaking glass, and the desperate cries of men. Marcus was slipping, and he knew it. He was surrounded, cornered, and his choices were dwindling. When the final tip came a hurried message from one of Sable's girls who'd overheard a desperate phone call, they moved. The code was simple, the message clear. Marcus would meet the Chicago clan's second-in-command at an abandoned distillery. The place was a tomb, soaked in the ghosts of old deals and darker sins. It was fitting, a place built on vice, now serving as the stage for betrayal. The scene reeked of stale whiskey, oil, and something sharper violence waiting to happen. The air was thick, pressing down like a loaded gun, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was about to unfold. "Let's finish this," Adrian growled, the raw passion of vengeance in his voice. He meticulously loaded a silver-plated pistol, each movement precise, each click of the mechanism a promise. Sable's smile was cold, beautiful, and entirely without mercy. Her eyes, alight with predatory anticipation, reflected the flickering flames of the city's wrath. "After tonight, they'll remember who owns this city." Hartwell just cocked his revolver, gruff but resolute. His jaw was set, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of determination and grim satisfaction. "Let's go make a mess." The distillery was a mausoleum of rotted oak and the ghosts of sweeter days. It reeked of old whiskey and fresh blood. Adrian and Sable flanked Hartwell as they entered, the air thick with the metallic pulse of danger. Marcus was waiting, flanked by Chicago vampire Sleek, hungry, brutal. Well, Marcus drawled, his grin sharp as a butcher's hook. "The prodigal son, the whore, and the lawman." How quaint. Adrian's smile was slow, cruel. "You've been busy, cousin. Pity you won't live to enjoy it." Marcus's face twisted. "You could have had it all. Instead, you chose her, chose this." "I chose a future," Adrian snapped, stepping forward. "You chose to drag us back into the dirt," Marcus snarled, snapping his fingers. The Chicago hitters surged. The fight exploded like a powder keg. The heavy scent of bourbon instantly mingled with the coppery tang of blood, a sickening, intoxicating perfume. The echo of footsteps filled the cavernous space, growing louder with each incoming attacker. Adrian moved like a demon unleashed claws, teeth, silver blade flashing in the dark. He fought like the centuries he tried to repress, every brutal lesson his father had ever drilled into him now unleashed with purpose. His blade sliced through the air, finding purchase in throats and chests, the silver searing flesh with each strike. A Chicago vampire screamed, a sound cut short as Adrian ended his pain, the body hitting the hard wooden floor with a dull thud. Sable was a blur of crimson and shadow, her strikes precise, merciless. She moved with the grace of Romanian nobility and the savagery of a woman who'd never again let anyone cage her. Her daggers danced in the flickering light, each stab a whisper of death. She dodged and weaved, using the shadows to her advantage, disappearing and reappearing, a whirlwind of destruction. Hartwell fired into the chaos, his revolver barking in sharp, brutal rhythm. He couldn't match their speed, but he was damn sure not going to die on his knees. The bullets ripped through the air, finding their marks with grim efficiency. The smell of gunpowder singed the air as he reloaded, each shot a desperate prayer. Blood soaked the wooden floors, black, something in between. It slicked the wood, making it difficult to find purchase. The screams, the grunts of exertion, and the wet slaps of bodies hitting the floor were all a symphony of violence. Adrian and Marcus clashed in the heart of the storm, fangs bared, Old grudges lay bare in fists and shattered ribs. You could have ruled at my side. Marcus roared, his blade slicing across Adrian's ribs, the silver seared, a white-hot pain that ripped through Adrian's control. Adrian slammed a fist into his cousin's face, sending him reeling. The crunch of bone was a sickening symphony echoing in the room. I don't want to rule like you. Adrian's voice was low, deadly. I want to live. Marcus lunged again, but Sable was there, her dagger plunging into his heart from behind. Family's overrated, she whispered in his ear, twisting the blade. The look on Marcus's face was a mixture of shock, pain, and betrayal, his eyes widening as the light faded. Marcus collapsed in a heap, his eyes wide with disbelief as his body turned to ash. The stench of burnt sulfur filled the air. The remaining Chicago vampires faltered, leaderless. Adrian didn't give them the chance to regroup. He tore through them with Hartwell covering his flanks, the humans' bullets finding their marks with deadly precision. The screams of the defeated echoed off the distillery walls as they fell. The clangs of metal on metal had finally subsided, and the battle slowly settled into a silence that allowed the survivors to register the chaos. When the dust settled, when the screams had faded, only the three of them remained standing, breathless, bloodied, bound together now in blood and bourbon. The metallic smell of blood hung heavy in the air, a testament to the carnage. Adrian leaned against a whiskey barrel, his breath ragged. Hartwell's face was grim but resolute, clutching his smoking revolver. Sable's crimson-stained garments clung to her like a second skin. Hartwell wiped a smear of black blood from his jacket. You owe me a drink. Adrian gave a rare, genuine laugh. Name your poison. Sable, leaning on Adrian's arm with casual familiarity, surveyed the wreckage. There's work to do. The city won't run itself. Let's just make sure we're the ones running it, Adrian said, his voice carrying the weight of choice and consequence. Hartwell holstered his gun, eyes sharp but not hostile. I'll keep the streets quiet. You keep the monsters in check. Sable's smile was faint, but it was real. That's the deal, Constable. And for the first time, the fragile peace felt possible. For now, the city breathed easier, but it was still a city of shadows. Peace wasn't something you carved in stone, it was something you bought, you bled for, and you held with trembling hands, hoping it wouldn't shatter. Adrian Steelgrave stood on the balcony of the crosscut, the city stretched beneath him like a tattered map. For the first time, the weight of the Steelgrave name didn't feel like a noose. It felt like something he could shape, something he could choose. The old guard was fractured. Those loyal to Marcus scattered or became ash. Adrian had called a meeting the night after the fight, laying down new terms. No more butchery, no more careless feeding, no more reckless deaths that ended in missing people. They would run their empire with precision, with balance. Blood would flow, yes, but not in the streets. The family had bristled at first, but when Sable had walked in, silent and lethal, and stood at Adrian's side without blinking, well, they started listening. Power didn't need to roar. Sometimes it just needed to be there. Across town, Hartwell signed off on another empty police report. No arrests, no explanations, just more silence. He'd made his choice. The law was a good thing, sure, but control? Control was what kept the monsters from eating the city alive. And as strange as it was, Adrian and Sable were now part of that control. He folded the report, lit a cigarette, and thought about Sable's eyes, that fierce, distant heat he could never quite reach. A small smile tugged at his lips. He'd always liked the impossible ones. The Casa de Noapte was quiet. The chaos of the past nights finally settled. Adrian found Sable on the upper floor, watching the streetlights burn against the creeping dawn. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Adrian murmured, "The city's changing." Sable didn't look at him. Cities always change. Question is, will we? He stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers light, hesitant like the first ripple in still water. I've spent years trying to outrun what I am. His thumb traced her knuckles. But maybe what I am is someone who doesn't want to be cold anymore. Her lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile. And if I do, then maybe we stop pretending we don't feel it, he said, his voice low. Maybe we should stop punishing ourselves. The sun began to rise, soft and Goldina rare thing in their world of smoke and bourbon. The first rays kissed the rooftops, turning the brick and stone to a warm, inviting amber. Down below, the city was waking, a slow, deliberate stretch after a long, cold night. A newsboy's call, sharp and clear, drifted up from the street, followed by the rustling of the morning paper as someone unfolded it on a nearby stoop. The air, still crisp with the lingering chill of the night, smelled of freshly brewed coffee and the faintest trace of wood smoke. A distant saxophone, a solitary note, hung in the air, a melancholic melody that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city. Sable finally turned to him, her walls cracking, her iron self-control bending just enough. The gold light painted her face, softening the angles he knew so well. Her hand tightened around his. "You're not walking away from this, Adrian Steelgrave." His mouth curved in a rare, honest smile. Wouldn't dream of it. They kissed not out of desperation, not out of inevitability, but because they finally chose to. It was a slow, deliberate touch, a promise whispered in the quiet of the dawn. The pressure of their mouths, a silent understanding, a fragile bridge between two haunted souls. Their bond had always been there, simmering under layers of ice and duty. Now, it burned. The city would still whisper. The streets would still hide things in the dark. But as the dawn broke over the skyline, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, there was something new woven into the cracks. Something almost impossible, a hope. Adrian could feel the sun warming his face, and for the first time in a long time, the thought of the future didn't fill him with dread. He inhaled deeply, the scent of Sable, of the city, of the coming day. "It won't be easy," Sable murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, as she rested her head against his shoulder. "No," Adrian agreed, his voice equally soft. "But we've faced harder things." "We have." The faint notes of the saxophone drifted up again, a little louder this time, accompanied by the faint, hopeful rhythm of jazzy drumming. Adrian and Sable stood there, shoulder to shoulder, allowing the dawn to envelop them. The soft glow of the sun on their faces, the slow, steady pulse of the awakening city. Hope, hard won, fragile, but real. Blood and bourbon still ran through the veins of the city, but so did the promise of something better. That's the end of this tale, but in the world of the supernatural, there's always another shadow waiting. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, turn, and heartbeat. If you enjoyed the ride, there's more waiting for you. Just check out the other audiobooks on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more magic, monsters, and stories that go bump in the night. Until next time, stay curious and brave and never stop listening.